At 21, Eliza felt like her world had crumbled beneath her. Just a week ago, she had been living what she thought was a normal, if slightly stressful, life, juggling her college courses, part-time job at the local bookstore, and dreaming of traveling to far-off cities where life seemed endless and full of possibilities. But all of that changed in the blink of an eye. Her father, a man worn thin by gambling debts and failed business deals, had come home one evening with a grave look in his eyes. He spoke with a weight she had never heard before, words that felt like they were cutting her life into pieces. "Eliza," he had said, voice shaking, I had to make a choice. I sold you." The words didn't make sense at first. Her mind froze, refusing to grasp the reality of what he was saying. She had heard of families losing everything to debts, sure, but this was different. She had been sold, and the payment, a horse, not a sum of money, not a land deed, not some vague promise of repayment, an actual horse. Her stomach churned, a mix of nausea and disbelief. How could this happen to her? She had always been careful, polite, helpful. She had thought she mattered. Yet here she was, her life being measured in hooves and reins, as if she were a commodity in some cruel transaction. By the next morning, she was on a creaking, dusty wagon, heading toward the ranch where her new life would begin. The landscape changed as they traveled further from the town she had always known. Fields stretched out endlessly, dotted with wildflowers and fences that seemed more like cages than boundaries. The air smelled of dirt and dry grass, a sharp contrast to the smell of books and coffee she was used to. Each mile felt heavier, each clop of the wagon wheels a drumbeat counting down her freedom. When they arrived, the ranch was vast and untamed, a sprawling landscape of barns, corrals, and endless pastures. And then she saw him. Cole, the man who was now responsible for her. He was leaning against the barn, a silhouette against the golden light of the late afternoon sun. His presence was as solid as the land itself, quiet yet undeniably commanding. His eyes, a piercing shade of blue, scanned her with an intensity that made her feel exposed, as if he could see every fear, every insecurity, every secret she had buried deep inside. Eliza's first instinct was to shrink back, to vanish, but there was nowhere to go. The ranch sprawled endlessly in one direction, a high fence in the other. And Cole, he didn't smile, he didn't speak immediately, he just watched, silent, like a storm waiting to break. She wanted to plead, to cry, to scream that this wasn't right, that she wasn't some object to be bartered. But the words lodged in her throat, choked by fear and disbelief. The first night in her new quarters was unbearable. She had been given a small room in the corner of the barn, a mattress on the floor and a thin blanket that smelled faintly of hay. The wind whistled through the gaps in the wood, a sound that made her heart race. She lay there, staring at the wooden beams above, trying to will herself to believe that this was only temporary, that somehow she would wake up tomorrow and find it was all a nightmare. But deep down, a gnawing sense of reality pressed on her chest. She had been sold. At 21, her dreams, her independence, her freedom, everything, had been stripped from her, leaving only fear and uncertainty. Morning brought more of the same dread. Cole moved through the ranch with a practiced ease, his hands firm on the reins, his boots kicking up dust as he worked with the horses. He seemed indifferent to her presence at first, treating her like a silent observer. But as the hours passed, he handed her small tasks, feeding a foal, carrying water, cleaning stalls. Each task was exhausting, yet oddly grounding. She realized, with a pang of frustration, that the man who now controlled her life also expected her to work. She was not allowed to falter, not allowed to cry, not allowed to escape the reality of her situation. Days stretched into a slow, heavy rhythm on the ranch, each one blending into the next under the relentless sun. Eliza had learned quickly that there was no escaping the routine. From dawn, when the first light filtered over the hills, to the dim glow of sunset, she worked alongside Cole in the ranch hands, carrying buckets of water, feeding the horses, and mending fences that never seemed to end. Her muscles ached in ways she had never known, and each night she fell into bed exhausted, every bone in her body protesting, yet a strange pride flickered within her. For the first time in weeks, she could feel her mind and body alive with purpose. Cole didn't speak much. His presence was steady, unyielding, like the mountains that framed the horizon. At first, Eliza interpreted his silence as indifference, or worse, judgment. He didn't coddle her. He didn't explain what was expected beyond the barest instructions. And yet, in those moments of quiet observation, she realized he was watching her, not with the cold detachment she had feared, but with a careful, almost protective attention. There was a rhythm to his gestures, a quiet grace in the way he handled the horses, the tools, the land itself, that made her realize he understood something about life she had only glimpsed in fleeting dreams. It was on the third day that he handed her the reins of a young, restless horse. Her heart pounded as she mounted, unsure if she could control the creature. The horse snorted, stamping its hooves, sensing her fear. Cole's blue eyes met hers across the paddock, a silent reassurance passing between them. "Steady," he said simply, and somehow, in that single word, she felt a flicker of courage. She took a deep breath, gripping the reins tighter, and followed the rhythm of the horse's steps. The animal wove in and out of the paddock, and for the first time in days, Eliza felt a spark of freedom, a fleeting taste of what life could be like beyond fear. As the days turned into weeks, Cole continued to teach her, not just about horses, but about the ranch, the land, and, unexpectedly, herself. He showed her how to read the weather by the clouds, how to mend a fence so that it would last through winter, how to anticipate the needs of a herd. And in these lessons, he spoke in a way that was indirect, yet profoundly meaningful. He didn't tell her she was strong. He showed her. He didn't promise safety. He provided it in small, tangible ways. Eliza began to notice small shifts in herself. Fear was no longer the only emotion that defined her days. Curiosity replaced some of it. She watched the way Cole worked, the way his hands moved with precision and care, the way his eyes softened when a foal nuzzled him. She began to listen to the subtle language of the ranch, the low whinnies of the horses, the creak of the barn doors, the whisper of the wind through the tall grass. And slowly, she realized she was learning to understand more than just the land. She was learning to understand him. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the fields, Cole finally spoke. They were sitting on the fence, watching the herd graze, the air warm with the scent of earth and hay. "Life doesn't often give second chances," he said quietly, almost to himself. "But sometimes, it gives you the hard ones. The ones that teach you more about who you are than comfort ever could." Eliza turned to him, heart pounding. "Why are you being kind to me?" she asked, the words barely audible. "I wasn't supposed to be here. I was sold." He looked at her, and for the first time, she saw something behind the stoic exterior, a flicker of empathy, of understanding, even sorrow. "You weren't sold, Eliza." "Not really," he said slowly. "Sometimes people make terrible choices out of desperation. But the choices of others don't define you. You do." The weight of his words settled over her like a warm blanket. She had been so focused on what she had lost, her freedom, her dreams, her place in the world, that she hadn't allowed herself to see what she still had. And in that quiet, unassuming moment, she felt a shift deep inside. She was no longer just a victim of circumstance. She was a survivor, learning to navigate a life she hadn't chosen, yet one she could begin to shape. The nights on the ranch had a way of transforming the ordinary into something magical. The sky stretched wide and endless, filled with stars that seemed to shimmer just for her, and the air smelled of earth, grass, and freedom she had never imagined possible. Eliza had come a long way since the day she was sold, and while the scars of her past were still there, they no longer controlled her. Fear had loosened its grip, replaced by something far more complex, curiosity, trust, and a fragile, flickering hope. It was on one such evening that Cole approached her with an unusual request. The ranch was quiet, the herd settled for the night, and the air was calm, almost reverent. "Come with me," he said, his voice low and steady. Eliza's heart leapt in her chest. She had ridden alongside him many times before, but this was different. There was an urgency in his tone, a kind of quiet insistence that made her feel both nervous and exhilarated. They saddled the horses in silence, the only sounds the clinking of the tack and the soft snorts of the animals. Cole mounted his horse with effortless grace and extended a hand to help her up. For a moment, their eyes met, and in that glance, Eliza saw a depth of understanding she had never encountered in anyone. It was as if he could see every fear, every doubt, and every fragment of courage she had buried deep inside herself, and he didn't judge her for any of it. The ride began slowly, the horses' hooves crunching over the soft dirt paths that wound through the ranch. At first, Eliza stayed close, tentative, unsure if she could handle more than the familiar paddocks. But Cole's calm presence, the steady rhythm of the horse beneath her, and the gentle guidance in his words gradually eased her tension. "Trust the horse," he said softly. "And trust yourself." With each step, Eliza felt a strange sense of liberation. The fences of her past, the limitations, the fear, the uncertainty, seemed to fall away. She realized that she had been holding herself back far more than anyone else ever had. For the first time in months, maybe even years, she felt the exhilarating sensation of being truly free. The wind rushed past her face, carrying with it the scent of possibility and the faintest hint of something she had once thought impossible, hope. As they reached the top of a small hill, the ranch sprawling out below them in a patchwork of fields and pastures, Cole finally spoke. "Eliza," he said, his voice carrying in the quiet night, "you weren't sold. You were saved." The words struck her like lightning. Her breath caught, and for a moment, she couldn't respond. Saved? From what? From who? Slowly, the truth began to settle over her, gentle but unstoppable. She had believed her life was over the day her father traded her for a horse, but perhaps that moment had not been the end at all. Perhaps it had been the beginning of a life she could never have imagined, a life defined not by what she had lost, but by what she could now gain. Cole didn't elaborate, but he didn't have to. His presence, the strength in his quiet assurance, and the unwavering trust he had shown her were proof enough. He had given her a chance to rediscover herself, to reclaim her agency, to learn that fear could be met with courage, and despair could be replaced by determination. He had offered her the greatest gift of all, the possibility of a new beginning. Eliza's eyes filled with tears, but they were not tears of sorrow. They were tears of release, of understanding, and of gratitude. She realized that she had been running from her past, but in truth, she had been running towards something far greater, a life that belonged to her, shaped by her own choices, and guided by the strength she had discovered within herself. Cole turned his horse toward her, a small, almost imperceptible smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "You're ready," he said simply. "Ready for what comes next." Eliza nodded, a smile breaking through her tears. The horizon stretched before them, endless and inviting, and she felt for the first time that the world was hers to explore. The fear that had once consumed her was gone, replaced by a quiet confidence in the knowledge that she could survive anything. And beside her, Cole rode, not as a master, not as a captor, but as a companion, someone who had helped her see that even the darkest moments could lead to light. They rode in silence, the horses moving in perfect harmony, the night alive with the whisper of wind and the faint chorus of distant crickets. And in that silence, Eliza understood the truth of her journey. Life had not ended for her at 21, it had merely begun anew, with challenges, yes, but also with possibilities she had never dared to imagine. As the first light of dawn touched the fields, painting the world in shades of gold and rose, Eliza felt an unshakable sense of peace. She had been tested, she had endured, and she had grown. And now, riding beside the cowboy who had become her guide and her anchor, she was ready. Ready for life, ready for love, and most importantly, ready to be the author of her own story. If you want, I can now create hyper-realistic image prompts for all three parts, perfectly suited for a thumbnail or story visuals that match the emotional depth of the narrative. Do you want me to do that?